Another thing about costuming is that it often lacks an important detail of anatomy. Here's another picture of Harry retreating into the forest. What's missing?
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments.
So when they first saw it, it was right about here, walking in this direction. So it takes about 3 strides and then vanishes into the shadows just around this corner. At that point, they drove forward and caught up to it. As the RV was just about to overtake it, it turned and walked back across the road, conceivably in the direction it had come. I mean, I assume that it came onto the road right about through here. And then it took duck for cover behind, back in the general direction it had come, back behind the Redwoods. Here I am standing back there, and that spot is kind of blurry. Okay, here we are, right about from the vantage point of the photographer, in this case. This is the big redwood you see off to the side. There's this very prominent burl, this knotty protrusion that's sticking out right here. You saw also this tree catching the headlights in the background. And then in some of the stills you'll also see this bush here catching the headlights with the leaves, the dampened leaves from the drizzly rains. Right, well there's a branch, oh yeah, there it is right there. Here's the branch right here, which, well, we were arguing about this on the, whether, or debating on whether that was the actual branch. In the video, when you see it, you can really only see one little piece of it here. Now this may or may not be the branch in the video. Danny believes it is. I think it might be, but he collected that on his
Danny, you
visit.
forgot the question.
Okay, here's the view. What we did is we backed the Ranger's pickup truck right into the spot where the RV was parked. We knew where that was because they got out of the RV and went around the front of it, and you could see the juxtaposition of the RV in relationship to this redwood with the big burl on the side here. The headlights were just shining over that. That burl is about 2 feet 11 inches tall off the surface of the road. The headlights are shining over the top of it. The headlights are, on this model, are 3 feet off the ground. Well, when it walked across the this in the same view, the dead snag in the background was clearly visible, and these barkless areas were reflecting the headlights quite brightly. Its head was obscured in the lower portion of that barkless area, and as it went behind the tree, there's a little protrusion here, which is just a big clump of moss growing on the side of the trunk. But in the video, it's quite evident just below the visor of the RV. And as it steps off the road, its head is roughly just below that protrusion. That protrusion measures just under 8 feet off the ground. Okay, so I suspect that the estimation is that it's between 7.5 and 8 feet tall. We also deduced the height from several different means. We could tell that the head was at least as high or higher than the high back seats, the driver and passenger seat. Referring to the manufacturer specifications, those are about 7.5 feet off the ground. Using some tricks of trigonometry with the highest point illumination of this tree, the approximate distance from the headlight to the subject, and the known height of the subject or the headlight off the ground, we could determine the height at which the headlight was intersecting the body of the subject, and then add that to the 3 at that distance minus the 3 feet of the headlight, using the dimension of the angle, the beam, and so forth, to come up with an estimate of where the headlight was intersecting the body. It was hitting the subject right at about the haunch right here, where the anatomical correlation here would be, but it was hitting it at a height of about 4 feet, so that would be right about here. Okay. And that's better than halfway, a little more than halfway up its body, so add on another 3.5 feet, and we've got 7.5 feet. All the eyewitnesses also gave that same approximate height estimation of 7.5 feet. We did talk to the ranger, who was extremely helpful, very open-minded, and very interested in the whole episode. We asked him about his surroundings, if this were a good place for somebody to perpetrate a hoax on these people. And he said, well, it would be the last place he would pick to do it, because it's a dead-end road. There's rarely any through traffic, especially not on a weeknight. He immediately named another major road through the park that goes right through the heart of the park. It's a through road from the highway to the highway. And he said that, and there is much more accessibility. There were places you could hide a vehicle. Remember, there's no place really along this road that you could hide a truck or hide any vehicle off the road. He told us about the blackberries. He said that he shared a couple of experiences from some of his colleagues that had sightings in the park and certainly on other occasions. He was very helpful. Here's down on the Smith River. The site is just right over through the trees in this direction. This is where the right-hand fork of the road comes out onto the river. Let's see if I can get
How deep is the river?
It's not really deep. I mean, it is deep as portion of the channel. I'd say maybe 3 or 4 feet. Yeah. Especially not in August.
So
yeah, especially in August.
So when the thing walked off the road, it was heading towards the river?
That in the direction of the river, right. The river was less than a 16th of a mile from the road in the direction it went. All right, now the thing that really struck me when I really started looking at this was the striking similarities that I could see between it and the Patterson film subject. Here's, this is a rather contrasting image, but here's the Patterson film subject from a plate that Renee's published in the Ames and Hamlin or Hamlin?
And like Monsters on Trial.
Right. And here is a frame, an incomparable pose of the Redwoods video subject. And yeah, he's got red eyes. He's winking at you, actually. But you can see that the extreme similarity in the shape of the head, in the proportions of the face of the head, the slope of the forehead, the heavy brows, the shape of the nose right there. And I don't think that's just tricks of the pixels there. That's actually the nose, what could pass as the lips, and so forth. The way the head is situated on the shoulders, it's a little bit further forward. But part of that's just, I think, illusory, since the trapezius on this subject is not nearly so massive as it is on the Patterson subject. The stoop of the back, the development of the buttocks, and so on. What you're seeing right here is the high back passenger seat. Here is the headlight glaring off the right thigh right here, and here's the left thigh back here. There's the buttock right there, small back, round shoulder. The arms sort of folded over in front. Here is that snag in the background, with the headlights hitting the barkless area back here, and then the highlights off of the leaves on that bush off the shoulder of the road. Here's another perspective. Again, another frame that Renee's published. Notice that the 3/4 posterior view showing the very flat face, very high prominent cheekbones, heavy brow ridge, sloping forward, crested head, real heavy, just massive trapezius coming way up on the base of the skull. Heavy buttocks back here. And I'll look over here and you can see we've got is that clear enough? The screen is folded a little bit there. But you can also see that the same shape of profile The same sort of disruption in the hair pattern here and here, suggestive of the ear, the sloping forehead, the stooped shoulders, the less developed trapezius, but still prominent buttocks. There were lots of comments about the light reflective area. The buttocks was either soiled from sitting down. It could even be feces matted in the hair. We've got, again, here's the high back passenger seat. I'll come back to this white spot right here, which looks like a bare spot or some. It could either be something adhered to the hair, or it's a spot where the hair has been rubbed off of the skin in that particular spot. I'll take on a little more significance later on. Okay, the shape of the skull. You've all heard about the sagittal crest. It's prominent on primates that have very small crania, but very heavy chewing musculature. And the throwing up of the crest here provides additional attachment for the very strong temporalis muscle attaching component of the process here. We can also correlate with that is that our very deep and heavy cheekbones and zygomatic arches for the attachment of the masseter muscle. Not only in some living primates, but we see that same kind of morphology in some of the fossil hominids. This is a robust australopithecine with a very prominent sagittal crest.
That last shot was a Gigantopithecus skull?
No, actually that was a robust australopithecine.
No, I mean before that. Next to the human skull.
Oh no, that was a mountain gorilla.
Okay.
Okay, now this is an interesting point though. Clearly, this subject had no prominent frontal rise of the forehead. It went right back from at about a 45-degree angle from the top of the brow ridge. Now, if you're constructing a mask, how do you deal with that? Well, you either have to not worry about the eyes and any kind of animation by using the actor's eyes, or you have to rearrange things a little. Here's Harry, from Harry and the Hendersons, and they solved the problem by simply putting the crest right in the front. Instead of sloping back from the brow to a crest in the back of the skull, they stick it up front so you end up with a long, deep face. Here's another example. Here's Chewbacca. And he's got sort of a pompadour hairdo, but still you can see that there's no attempt to, there's no way that they can hide the prominent frontal of the human. My batteries are running over here. This also illustrates well the fact that many very tall individuals are also extremely lanky. And Chewbacca would never pass for Patty. He just doesn't have the girth. Massiveness. Oh, shucks. Well, if you crane your head, here's another example of a cheap costume, and also showing the very round skull and big round forehead. And also, this is illustrative too of the appearance of artificial fur that's very cheaply constructed. One thing that really needs to be done, however, and this is something that I hope to pursue, is to interact with costume designers and the animatronics industry. This is from the Honda Passport commercial where 4 bears, it's actually one actor, filmed 4 different times, come in and find this passport parked on the side of the road. And Cinefex magazine published a really interesting article describing how they constructed, they being Jim Henson's Creature Shop. And it's an extremely elaborate apparatus, even to the point of having muscles that are attached to the costume and tethered to the legs, so that they can simulate movement of muscle masses to a certain degree through this type of prosthetic device. They built up the torso with these foam ribs, this rib cage, and the head is completely suspended out here in front. Maybe back up to this, in case it was completely dead.
Use a stick spoiler.
The stick, here you go. I'm probably reaching the area.
There you go.
Okay. All right, so
A screaming sound.
so anyway, and the head would be suspended off of this device here, out in front, and it was operated by a number of puppeteers with remote control devices to give some appearance of animation. raising the eyebrows and squinting and curving the lips and so forth. So this is an avenue I think that's important that should be investigated further if we're going to really seriously evaluate some of these films. Okay, this sequence of stills is really interesting. Again, to orient you, here's the head right here, here's the shoulder, back, right thigh right here. This shadow here is the high back passenger seat. Okay, so the arm is sort of folded here in front of the body, right here. Here's some of those leaves catching the light here. Here's that white spot I was telling you about. Now, if you notice here, the gluteus maximus muscle here is quite stretched out. The muscle's relaxed. It's pulled out to its full excursion, or not its full excursion, but it's stretched as the right leg is swung forward. But then as weight comes down and over that leg, the gluteus, which is a retractor of the thigh relative to the torso, so pulling the thigh back this way, begins to flex. And we can actually see it start to flex, and that's indicated by the change in the way the highlights of the headlights are hitting it. Here there are really no highlights. Okay, and as it comes in, of course, some of this is coming into the headlight more closely. But you can see more of a bulge here, and right down here you can see the insertion of the muscle on the thigh, this dark area right here, which as the gluteus contracts all the way, now as the thigh is actually extending, it's hyperextending back here, it's past 180 degrees, here's this furrow right here, indicating the insertion of the gluteus maximus on the thigh, and you follow that furrow up, and it ends right here at that white spot. Well, what is that white spot? Well, here's a human. Can someone just focus that just a little bit? Turn that knob. Here's a human thigh. Here's the gluteus maximus in the buttock. Here's that furrow. See right here? That was indicated by a shadow. We follow that up to the white spot. And what's under the white spot? The greater trochanter of the femur. It's a big knobby attachment point for muscles on the side of your hip that you can feel right there. And if hair were going to be rubbed off of the side of a haunch, that would be the first place, either there or up on the, if the bone is subcutaneous enough, there's not a lot of fat, up on the rim of the ilium, the hip bone itself. But down there on the femur would be the logical place for that light spot to appear. Anatomically correct. Okay. Another thing about costuming is that it often lacks an important detail of anatomy. Here's another picture of Harry retreating into the forest. What's missing? What's wrong with this picture? Pardon?
It's all flat.
Who said it? Someone said it.
Butt crack.
Butt crack's missing. Or if you want to say it a little more politely, it's the natal cleft. The natal cleft is absent. It's like a pair of trousers.
Yes, it looks like he's wearing jeans.
Yeah, it's like wearing jeans, okay? And there are several frames, if you look closely, where you can see an indication of the natal cleft in the subject. So in a costume, and likewise in the Patterson film, there are several frames that show a clear indication of a natal cleft. But it's missing in Patty. What's interesting, if you have Harry and the Andersons, go back. You've got a VCR, you can do stop action on it. And in this shot here, you'll actually see the actor's foot right here poking through the rubber bottom of the artificial feet. It's really kind of a fun exercise to go back to a movie like this and look very carefully at the costume and see what you can pick up.
Where was that photograph from?
Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now we're back to the Redwoods video. Now, more muscle masses that can be seen. Right here, though, again, this is a little hard to interpret right off the bat, but what you're seeing, the headlights, unfortunately, were a little bit too close to the subject. It would have been nice if they stopped just maybe 15 feet back. The brights would have cut the whole subject in the headlights. As it is, we're illuminated up here to about the waist. Here's the thigh, the knee, and the lower leg. And the lower leg, as you can see, has quite a shock of long hair off of the shin bone, or the shin area. And this struck me as really odd when I first saw it, until, as I thought about it, and I looked at, I was thumbing through a book and noticed a picture of a male and female orangutan in a zoo. And the female has short, tight hair. I mean, well, short for it relative to an orangutan, but still fairly long, 3 to 4 inches. But the male, the big male, adult male with the big cheek phalanges, had long, profuse especially on its arms and legs. I don't know if this is a detail. I've never really talked to anyone or looked into reliable recounting of hair length in various sizes to how shaggy. It seems to vary quite a bit. We kind of get the Patterson film subject stuck in our heads, and with a very tight gorilla kind of sheen to its. But anyway, we can see here then definition of the quadriceps muscle here. You can also make out right in here and realize that these are printouts rather hurriedly made off of my laser printer, and they lose a lot of quality when they go from the computer screen to the laser printer. It's not providing the photographic image necessarily. But you can see the adductor muscles on the inner surface of the opposite thigh, the left thigh. You can notice that as the foot extends out here, it's going to get distorted because of this thing, but there is a little bit of dorsiflexion of the toes, showing action in the tibialis anterior and the extensor digitorum longus as it is extending the leg, getting ready for a step down. The feet are visible here now. As I mentioned, this part gets cut off on the TV screen, but the light areas you see right here are the lateral sides of the feet. Now they're not necessarily white. Remember that it's dark and rainy. The image is very contrasty, so anything that's smooth is going to be very reflective. Even if it's jet black, if it's wet, and you shine a bright light on it, it's going to reflect back rather brightly. Okay, then we come to, and there have been criticisms raised about these, that they're sneakers, that it's this rubber sole of the tennis shoe. Personally, I find that just simply incredulous that because of all the other details of this costume that I can see, that someone would go to so much trouble and then have running shoes exposed in the bottom of them. We're having someone work on some enhancements. It's been a slow process and there's been negotiation for compensation and so forth. Once that's done, he assures me that they will be able to tell whether or not it is an athletic footwear or
Sorry.
okay, now we've got this mystery white object here out in front. When I first saw that, I didn't know what to make of it. I thought, well, is it, we'd seen the white patch on the rump that appeared to be, there were things stuck to the fur that were almost certainly redwood fronds, which get into the hair very readily, the dead, dried redwood fronds that have fallen to the ground. I thought, was it some piece of debris that the tried has hooked onto the hair? Is it a lock of matted hair or something swinging as it's going along? And then the fourth option is this male genitalia? Is this a penis? At first I thought, well, it can't be. Well, before I get to that, one of the other ideas was it was the palm with the hand. Palm's up, and so the arm is swinging, and the palm is up. Well, that doesn't make any sense because when this leg is leading out, that arm should be swinging back. If it's walking normally, and in the Patterson film, there's nothing to suggest that they have their gait is any different. So it came back, and so it's not that. I know for sure it's not the hand, because if we go 3 or 4 frames ahead, the camera pans up out of the headlights. As it comes into the darker area, the iris adjusts, and you see that the arm is actually up here. It's not down at the side. It's up above its waist, crossed in front of its body, as I pointed out in one of those other juxtaposition figures. So we're back to the penis. Is this a penis? And if so, what's going on here? Well, whoops. Oh, we'll just leave it. It'll work. Chimpanzees, primates in general, use a penile display in a variety of contexts. They'll use it for either sexual solicitation, as in this case, where she wants the fruit, he wants something else, and he'll trade the fruit for that. And so he's extending an invitation here. Now look at the anatomy here. It's right there. Okay. In other situations, here's another one, another sexual solicitation to give a little better anatomy. Notice the difference, the contrast to human anatomy. There is no glands. There's a lot of variation in the morphology of the chimpanzee penis, but typically it has a rather sickle shape with an upturned curve. It's very tapering, it's very narrow in caliber. All right. Usually it's ensheathed in a hairy prepuce called the pars proximalis, and then the part that extends out. It's very similar to the anatomy of your household dog. When the pars distalis then it becomes erect, it extends beyond the hairy sheath. But when it's flaccid and retracted, it's very inconspicuous. When you look at a chimpanzee's genitalia in just an unaroused state, the most prominent thing and feature is the scrotum, the large testicles, but the shaft of the penis is very inconspicuous. Here's another situation. This male is being threatened by an alpha male just off camera, and he responds with this anxious pant hooting and a penal display. His cohort here is trying to calm him down by grooming him.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.